Okay. Good afternoon once again. My name, I'm Charles Lavella. I'm head of communication here at NERSA, and I will be facilitating this briefing session. Firstly, I would like to welcome all the media, our stakeholders, energy regulator members that have managed to join this briefing session, as well as stakeholders that are following or will be following the briefing session via our social media platforms. The purpose of this briefing is to provide clarity on the revised National Rationalized Specification, the NRS 048 Part 9 Code of Practice on load reduction practices, system restoration practices, and critical load and essential load requirements under power system emergencies, which was approved by the energy regulator on the 8th of March 2024. I believe you have received the program. It was sent with the program. I mean, with the link, and it's a very short, program. There are no changes to the program that you have received. We'll have a presentation on the revised NRS 048 Code of Practice by the full-time regulator member responsible for electricity regulation at NERSA, Mr. Nhlanhla Gumede, and this will be followed by some brief remarks on the revised Code of Practice. That will be remarks will be made by Mr. Vali Padaji, who is the chairman of the management committee of the NRS Association of South Africa, and then we'll have the question and answer session. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Mr. Gumede for the presentation. Over to you, Mr. Gumede. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hlabela. I'd like to just say good afternoon to everybody that has joined us today in this brief session. As indicated by Mr. Hlabela, this briefing, in fact, was just was predicated by the concerns that have been raised in the media in terms of, it became quite clear that a simple standard, issuing of a standard, which is just an update, basically us as NERSA, in conjunction with the people who are managing the grid code, that just updating that has generated a lot of concerns out there, with a view that perhaps are we now saying that there is an imminent, if you like, blackout of the system? Why are we moving from having 8 levels of load shedding to having 16 levels of load shedding? So we thought it might be useful just so that we can have a conversation on this. We will make some presentation. The presentation itself is not meant to replace the actual document NRS 048-9. It's really just to guide, just to indicate, I guess at high level, what is intended by this document. So without much further ado, let me just try to talk you through some of the issues. I thought it would be useful, firstly, as we start, that we actually start with I know the media likes to call load shedding blackouts, that at least let's have an understanding of what a blackout is in terms of the definition, the proper definition of blackout versus an emergency system or protocol that is aimed at ensuring grid stability, load shedding, that those, in fact, so we, at least if I thought that if we can start with a shared view of that, it might be useful. So I just put a Google definition of what a blackout is, which is in fact is a total nationwide crash of a power grid due to an imbalance between generation and consumption. As all of you know, that electricity is one of those commodities that you got to consume as you generate. So in some cases, there's an imbalance. And so either they are producing too much or you are producing too little. Either one of those situations is actually undesirable, and therefore the system operator will always make sure that they actually correct that imbalance. And in South Africa, luckily, we're blessed with of all of the things that we may be have issues with. But one thing that we do know of is that we can trust our systems operator. It's great at what it does, and it is highly unlikely that we'll ever actually get a blackout. So, and of course, linked to a blackout, there are brownouts as well, which in terms of Wikipedia, it captures it as an intentional or unintentional drop in voltage. So you'll see just lights dimming. So in fact, that means the frequency has dropped below 50 in our case, or 60 in countries that are actually operating at 60 hertz. So, but load shedding is neither a blackout nor a brownout. In fact, it's aimed to avoid both. Load shedding, by definition, is a time-based interruption of supply to customers, but on a rotational basis. So you don't actually get a group of customers that suddenly have got no supply at all, while others are actually meant to actually be kept lit. Yes, of course, there are those emergencies that or those places that are deemed to be critical. Those may be exempt, but in fact, load shedding is meant to be nationwide, and it's not supposed to actually. It's not supposed to discriminate. Load shedding is a controlled intervention, which affects a limited number of customers at any one time, at any one point in time. Whilst, of course, blackout is without warning, uncontrolled, and can affect many, if not all, customers. And I'm sure examples of what has happened in other countries. Essentially, load shedding is meant to be a blackout protection. So that is the definition. I just thought we'll actually start there, have a shared view of that, of the definition. I thought also it might be useful to just, I thought I would put a top 10, but there wasn't enough space. But I thought I would just highlight a few of these blackouts that have occurred. In recent times, but I guess 1965, which is 59 years ago. Some people might say it's not recent, but in terms of electricity, I guess it could be deemed to be recent. But starting from there, looking at the Great Northeast Blackout of 1965, but this one was actually not even about generation. It was about the transmission network that tripped and blacked out East Canada, New York State, and other states as well. And then, of course, the next one is the New York City one, which was also, again, the point I'm just trying to raise with these examples, by the way, is that it's not just about generation, that blackouts could be caused by other things, that it was caused by a lightning bolt that hit a substation located on the Hudson River, and that led to a 24-hour chaos. And at that time, anyway, because there were lots of job losses in New York, it resulted in a number of issues, including widespread looting and fires across the city. And then, of course, the Indian blackout of 2012, which hit, because of the size of India, it affected more than 700 million people. And it's not quite clear what caused it. But the two causes there that have been postulated, the one that it was because of poor infrastructure, as well as, of course, the unpredicted shift in power requirements, as basically So the system operator could not plan. So there were shifts in the demand pattern that then affected led to 28 Indian states being without power. Venezuela, of course, I think there the issue was whether, some people argue it was a sabotage, but experts say it was actually poor grid maintenance. Italian blackout of 2003 led to a 12-hour power outage, which affected all of Italian peninsula and parts of Switzerland, affecting over 56 million people. That was like the biggest blackout, I think, or the biggest blackout, yes, in Europe. Texas, it's all still fresh in our minds. In 2021, this affected 9.9 million people in both the across the US and Mexico. This was the largest blackout faced by the US since the Northeast blackout of 2003, which had affected 59 million. That was the affected people were in the US and in Canada. The last one in my list is the Pakistan blackout, which lasted 12 hours in some areas, impacted over 99% of the population. In essence, what we are saying, that's what blackouts are. Load shedding is not a blackout. So we just thought it would be useful to start here and just to indicate that the load shedding as a tool or a protocol is a tool that is used by the systems operator to ensure grid stability. What I want to see is that with most of us as consumers, we see one side of it. Because I assume that everybody knows that when it comes to electricity, the systems operator primary responsibility is that number 50. If it falls below 50, the systems operator has to do something to correct that. Normally, it falls below 50 because demand is exceeding supply, and if the systems operator does not correct that, it could result in other units tripping and could actually trip out the whole system. But also there are also times when the frequency goes higher than 50, especially as load comes off. So again, the systems operator that is when supply exceeds demand, and the system's frequency rises above 50 hertz. And in hertz, basically the systems operator then has to do something to actually correct that. And basically curtails supply. There are lots of countries that have unfortunately experienced this so-called load curtailment or load shedding. But I like the term DUMSO, which is the Ghana version of load shedding. But they call it DUMSO. But other countries perhaps have given it different names. But because the curtailment of demand is the one that is visible. But I just wanted to stress that there is also an equal amount of curtailment of supply. It just depends what type of supply options you've got. So the actions, I thought, as indicated, the systems operator has just got a task, just maintain that number 50, that number 50 hertz. Now, clearly on the demand side, I know that most of us, all we see is load shedding. However, there are many tools in the systems operator's toolbox, and load shedding is the last resort. It's not the most pleasant option to manage demand that the systems operator would utilize. So it looks at large customers. There's load curtailment there. Most of that is actually agreed up front. Those are the contracted. That is the contracted load. The large customers. So those are basically, there's always an agreement with them. So, and that could well come out of, and part of those agreements is having some kind of interruptible load. And there's also some of the players participate in the demand market. There are some options there that are utilized by the market, and also there is voluntary load. There is voluntary load reduction by customers, and then of course, last of that would then be load shedding, where part of it also there is self-reduction by those customers that upon receipt of instruction from the systems operator, they will reduce their load by a certain percentage. Mainly things like smelters do that. They are instructed and they do that themselves. So it's they actually self-load shed. You also have sometimes limits that are actually remotely imposed. And the last option, of course, which most people have in some cases had been used. I think in Gauteng here was used previously. I don't know whether City Power still uses it. Ripple control, which is remote switching of some of the circuits. So you don't switch off the whole power into a household, but you basically switch off certain things like geysers, which are big consumers. So those are the options that are available. That's on the demand side. But on the supply side as well, that is when the frequency exceeds 50 hertz. Clearly, if you've got dispatchable plants, those are easier to control. You ramp them up or down. So, and of course, the use of open cycle gas turbines, which you use also to manage demand. You switch them on or off, and they ramp up very quickly, and they come on stream very quickly. And also, if you want to take them down, you take them down very quickly as well. The open cycle gas turbine, they're just expensive to run. Load following, of course, which we do in South Africa, basically where coal plants are used to follow the load, with all of the negative impacts that come with it. And it's something that still needs to be investigated, because some of us do believe that it does have a negative impact on the EAF, on the availability of the plants. But it is something that is available, can use coal plants to follow load. Perhaps not the most optimal way of using of coal plants. Now, when it comes to self-dispatching plants or non-dispatchable plants, it's limited. So when the wind is blowing, the wind is blowing. When the sun is shining, the sun is shining. So in terms of reducing their output, there is a curtailment framework, but that is associated for those that are contracted to supply the single buyer. Those are associated with deemed energy charges that we as consumers pay for. So supply is curtailed, but because they would have produced and they can show that they would have produced, they get paid for that power that they have produced, although it's been curtailed. All of this is governed by the scheduling and dispatch rules, which and those are part of the grid code, of the transmission grid code. So in essence, what we're saying is that it's not just load shedding. The systems operator do not just load shed. There are other things, other tools that it uses in its toolbox, and also it's not just about curtailing load, but also supply is also curtailed. I just thought by way of example, I know this is a busy slide. It's in one of the codes. I just thought I'll just put this in it's. I just copied it from the codes, and it's really just to show that firstly, load shedding is a last resort. That depending on the severity of the load, in terms of how much load is exceeding supply, you actually start from the left going to the right. Those are the options that are available to the systems operator. And also, in essence, there's part of it which there are participants themselves do this. And then, of course, the National Transmission Company then also participates, but it's only as the demand far exceeds supply and the frequency is dropping significantly at the risk of a blackout that then the systems operator initiates load shedding. And in terms of those plans, from 1 to, like for instance, that was indicated as 1 to 4, but I guess going forward from 1 to 16. The same also applies when it comes to load shedding. Sorry, when it comes to supply curtailment, is that it's not always the first option where you just curtail supply. There are lots of other things that are done by the generators themselves, as well as then there's market operations. But of course, as it does this, it needs to make sure that it needs to consider the economic impact. So those are the options if the frequency exceeds 50 hertz. But I just thought that we will go into this and say, when we talk about this NRS 048-9, what exactly is it? And also, what is it? What is it not? So the first one, in terms of what it is indeed a standard that guides the systems operator on the steps to implement load shedding in a manner that seeks to protect power system. That's the first one. It's a code of practice for a real-time emergency load shedding. It's also about restoration of supply after an incident, prioritizing essential services where that's technically feasible, and the increasing load shedding stages is not an indication of an imminent load shedding. It's just saying it gives the systems operator greater flexibility to say, in the event that the demand exceeds more than 8 megawatts, for instance, or 8,000 megawatts, for instance, how is the system operator supposed to respond? It's just a greater. It facilitates the better management of our grid. What it is not, firstly, honestly, and this is unfortunately how it may have come out in the public, it is not supposed to be an indication that greater levels of load shedding are imminent. It's not supposed to also substitute any action that the system operator may deem necessary to ensure grid stability. We all know that as we go green, as we rely more on green energy, for instance, which are variable energy sources, that unfortunately the weather does come into play. Clean, but there are weather issues, and this applies not just wind and solar. It's same with hydro. The more hydro you have, if you have a drought, we have a drought. So you do need, therefore, to then say the greener we become, or the more dependent on the weather we become, we need to give the systems operator a greater set of tools to be able to manage the situation in the event that the weather does not play ball. Just as a takeaway, just to indicate what stage 16, which has been put forward, means. It's really about when 80% of the load is not met. That is, 80% of the demand cannot be met. Will that situation ever arise? Highly unlikely. But the fact that it cannot arise, it does not mean that you don't provide for it, you don't plan for it. As they say in strategy, hope is not a strategy. You plan for the worst and hope for the best. And that is all that the NRS 048 is. Now, in closing, I do want to raise a few points. That says, for us, we can all help to avoid the so-called doomso or load shedding. As indicated, I do like this Ghanaian version, as they call it, doomso. We actually can avoid doomso. How? Most of us are aware that after load shedding, for instance, in most towns or most townships, the power then trips. As the power comes back, the transformers trip on overload, and really for that, it has got two problems in that regard. Is that it puts a lot of pressure on the municipalities or the distributors to then try to manage the demand. When in fact, and that's number two, if they were to then end up increasing the capacity of that of those transformers, it results in a higher NMD or higher notified maximum demand exceedance cost. Now, we can all avoid that in most cases, and it's pretty simple. After load shedding, those that have got batteries in their house, especially even if they are solar powered in the main, but if load shedding happens, if by time load shedding ends, the sun is set, then most people just charge their batteries. So over and above the demand that they normally have, they end up with twice the demand because now they are not only using electricity for their immediate needs, but they're also charging batteries. The question is why? Why can't we just, as a nation, have a system where after load shedding, we do not charge batteries immediately? We all know how the electricity consumption pattern happens, that immediately on startup, the power demanded is much higher than when it's at steady state. When things start up, they consume far more power than when they are running at steady state. But over and above that, we then put a load which is now charging batteries. Why? Clearly something that we can all do. We can avoid this. By avoiding this, we can actually begin to contribute positively towards reduction of load shedding. And clearly for me, the question is, especially if we're going tonight, why can't we just shift the charging of batteries to off-peak? If it's during the day, we charge it during the day between around 12 and 2, and not charge batteries during peak or charge it at night. Why don't we do that? Even charging cars for that matter. So we can all contribute towards this. Number two, there's the thermal load. Quite frankly, I don't know why South Africans believe that heating with electricity is the right thing to do. Because in most developed economies, people use gas for heating. Whether it's a gas heater in terms of space heating, or gas geysers, although we call them geysers, but they're actually just gas water heaters, because they don't store, you actually don't store hot water, you heat it as we use it. And lastly, we move to gas stoves. That even just for most people, if they did this, not only will they save us from load shedding, but they'll probably save up to 60% of their energy cost. Because the most efficient way of for thermal load is gas. And then lastly, of course, as we invest more in self-generation, which is great. So if you have got if you're generating your own power, you are also contributing towards lessening the impact of load shedding. But clearly, when we do this, we must ensure that whatever that we do not negatively impact on the less fortunate. Oh, I said less unfortunate, less fortunate, who cannot afford some of these solutions that we have. What I mean by that is there's a whole lot of things that are actually which are associated with that. For instance, this whole issue that if we are going to use the grid as your emergency backup, system, and to contribute to it, contribute to the system as a backup. Because if you don't, then you're just shifting that load or that responsibility to those that unfortunately are not fortunate enough to be able to have their own self-generating system. Mr. Tlhabela, I will stop there. Hopefully I didn't take too much time. But the message that I was trying to raise with all of this, colleagues, is that firstly, NRS 048 was never intended to indicate that there is an imminent danger. And if that was the message that came through, we truly have to apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gumede, for a very comprehensive presentation, which I think covered all the major topics. I will now hand over to Mr. Vali Padachi for some few remarks before we get to the Q&A session. I must also indicate that colleagues will share the presentation with you. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Padachi.
Good afternoon to the esteemed NESA leadership team, members of the media, my colleagues in the NRS Association of South Africa, and all others present. With 5 minutes allotted to me, I aim to be concise and direct in my remarks. First and foremost, on behalf of the NRS Association of South Africa, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to the NESA leadership for prioritizing the approval of NRS 048 Part 9, Edition 3. This Edition 3, which was a collaborative effort between the NRS Association of South Africa and various stakeholders, stands as an industry document rather than specific to Eskom or the municipality. That's a very important statement. It's not an Eskom document, it's not a municipal document, it's an industry document. Its development, influenced by widespread consultation, marks a significant milestone in the plus or minus 25 years history of the NRS Association of South Africa, because it arguably was one of the most widely consulted codes of practice. We actually went beyond our normal mandate with respect to consultation of stakeholders because of the critical nature of this document. Edition 3 was crafted in response to feedback from many stakeholders, including the EIUG, the Minerals Council of South Africa, BUSA, etc., recognizing the current electricity crisis, the evolving energy landscape, and the need for an updated code of practices, regulations, etc. So there was a question asked by many of the media in the last few weeks why there was a need to go to Edition 3 from Edition 2. And that was a significant reason because of the request from some key stakeholders. My next comment is very important. By incorporating aspects of scenario planning methodology, I repeat, by incorporating aspects of scenario planning methodology, we addressed critical uncertainties because scenario planning and uncertainties are aligned. So we addressed critical uncertainties, including, inter alia, the possibility of heightened load shedding stages up to and including the unlikely event of stage 16 by taking the full electricity load of the national grid. And in so doing, we significantly mitigated the propensity of human error by the good operator people that work in Eskom system operations and Eskom and the municipal distribution centers. So a key attribute of this edition 3 is that we recognize the competency of the system operator people, but they're all humans and they can make error. So a key driver of this document was to mitigate human error. Despite challenges, we are confident that the collective efforts of the NRS Association, Eskom Generation Team, NESA, the Electricity Ministry, and relevant authorities will prevent a national blackout and a total national electricity grid collapse, even during severe or emergency conditions. Just to repeat what Mr. Gumede said, South Africa has not had a total blackout and grid collapse in the 100 years of Eskom's existence. We've been load shedding since 2008, but we never had a blackout. And we don't want to, and I say this with utmost humility, we don't want to get to a blackout situation. And in conclusion, I express my appreciation and sincere gratitude, again on behalf of the NRS Association, for the ongoing collaboration and hard work of all involved parties. I thank you, and I yield back the floor back to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Badaji, for the remarks. Colleagues, the floor is open now for questions, comments, and clarification on the revised NRS 0489 Code of Practice or related topics. You just need to raise your hand and you'll be duly recognized. And if you could please introduce yourself and the media house you are representing before asking the question. I see a hand from Lamis. You can go ahead, Lamis.
Hello, everyone. This is Lamis Umarji from News 24. I understand stage 16 would mean the load needs to reduce by 80%. But have you guys done any, considered how many hours that would be? You know, just something that would be more understandable for the average person. How much is 80%? You know, how does it translate to in hours? And then my other question is related to solar PV rooftop installations. Some municipalities like Cape Town are implementing measures to have these rooftop feed back into their municipal grids. Is there any just an industry perspective on how that then affects the grid stability, as we were learning about, you know, it going higher than 50 hertz, you know, that sort of thing? That's all I have.
Thanks, Lamis. Any other questions? I don't see any hand. Mr. Gumede, over to you. Sorry. Let's take Terence first. You can go ahead, Terence.
Thanks, Charles. I just wanted to understand, really to Mr. Padiachi, what the key human error risk was that prevailed under the previous edition, and how that has been now fully mitigated with this edition. Thank you.
Thanks, Terence. I think we can respond to the questions. Over to you, Mr. Gumede and Mr. Padiachi.
Thank you, Mr. Hlabela. Ordinarily I would have referred the first question to my team, but with Mr. Padiachi on the call, I think he can answer the first question better. Although in the table it is indicated late stage 16. Ms. Omaji, it's equivalent to is equivalent to 32 hours of power not available. But I think I'll leave that question. I'll defer that question to Mr. Padiachi to respond to, and of course to respond to Terence's question. But your question, your second question around solar PV. The challenge in life is that when we try to do good, we sometimes raise challenges. The systems operator, when they have got basically, as long as they've got all control of the power stations that are dispatching power, and also on a day-ahead market, they can plan. They basically, even whether it's wind or solar or other renewable sources, they will all commit to how much power they will put onto the grid a day ahead. And then, of course, as nature has it, is that reality will only see reality on the day of operations, and it's rare to have all of the predictions fully met. Solar is much better than wind. It can be predicted. But clearly, I would assume that we'll all agree that for anything that falls, for the dispatch that falls outside of the systems operator, the system just sees the power coming in, it would affect the system. But of course, it's the extent. If we are looking at power that is exported by, in terms of rooftops of say 5 or 6 megawatts in a system that is 24,000 megawatts or 29,000 megawatts yesterday, in a system like that, it may not necessarily be enough to cause much disruption. But clearly, as more of this, as more of us go green, and we are not governed by the systems operator, we decide when we're going to export power and decide when we're going to import power. Clearly, it does put a lot of pressure on the systems operator. So hence the need for system operator to have a greater arsenal of tools that it can then deploy to ensure that it can better manage those situations. I hope I was clear. Thank you. Can I then ask Fali if you can address the two questions for me? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gumede. Just in terms of the first question from Libby's News 24, I think in your slide, it was quite clear, but just
slide 9.
Slide 9. So essentially, at stage 16, I repeat, in the unlikely event of stage 16, from a scenario planning perspective, a customer would experience 32 hours of load shedding. And why 32 hours? You may say we have 24 hours in a day, but you will know from the document that it's on a 32-hour cycle. So without going into detail, you'll be virtually being load shed the entire day. So that's the prognosis for stage 16. And just to get to Terence's question, I'm glad you asked that question, Terence, because that's an important parameter, because that's how the document was also developed. Now, if we take a step back, edition 2, we went up to stage 8, right? And until 2 weeks ago, when edition 3 was officially released and became legally mandated. So before that, if we went into a situation beyond stage 8, then the good people at system operations and the ESCOM and Munich distribution centers, would have went into what we call, in very simple terms, an emergency and contingency mode to effectively manage and efficiently manage the required load shedding stages beyond stage 8 to maintain a supply and demand requirement of 50 Hertz, as Mr. Gumede had explained in his slide. Now, this is the crux of my response. In an emergency situation beyond stage 8, which we can't rule out as an NRS, given the erratic nature and instability of the grid, notwithstanding ESCOM's current good performance, the system operations people, it becomes, let me keep it simple, it becomes a bit more complex when you get beyond stage 8, because you have less load, electricity load, to play with or to manage with in effecting those additional load shedding stages. So the propensity, and these people are humans, although they're very competent, the propensity of making an error in a real-time emergency situation then increases. So what we did as an NRS team, with wide consultation amongst many, many highly qualified engineers, we said, let's mitigate that risk, not entirely, because we can't do it entirely, but as much as we can do. So what we did is we took the maximum load, not maximum, the highest load on the grid, and so nationally, and we roughly equated that to mechanistically or mathematically to stage 16, and that would be mathematically also the maximum stage you would probably go to. Now, to move from stage 8 to stage 16, unlikely. The propensity of error is there with edition 2. With edition 3, we provided a number of tools and guidelines and etc., so that the good people in system operations, etc., would be able to rely on to assist them in that emergency real-time situation. So that's the essence of what we've added in mind in terms of mitigating human error. We've tried to bring it down to an absolute minimal challenge. And I'm back to you, Chair.
Maybe before you come back, Charles, if I can just add on this one, that you see, when we've got a plan that says in the event that we've got 40% of the load that's not being met, or rather you've lost 8,000 megawatts of power, you know you've got a plan. You know that you're going to move. You're going to cut off this city and cut off that city or cut off that city in that particular sequence, and the number of hours that are actually those that are scheduled. Unfortunately, if you don't have an equivalent for anything that where you now have, for instance, you go to where you've lost 13,000 megawatts of power, we don't have an equivalent system. Then you're actually just leaving the actual shutting off or the actual load curtailment at the whim of whoever is the operator at that point in time. So if you have the schedule, then at least you know it's predictable. Might not be the best for the country, but at least it's predictable for the sole purposes of preventing a blackout. That you know is preventable. You can then offload. There is a pattern, and it's not going to be reliant on an individual who happens to be an operator at that particular point in time. So I'm really hoping it's clear, Terence, that it's really about having a system which is globally understood, that in the event that you don't have 10,000 megawatts of power, who are you going to offload in what pattern? And it's not dependent on the operator on the day, which is what we do what we had for all of the other levels from 1 to 8. I'm hoping that's clear. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Kumete and Mr. Padaj for the responses. Colleagues, we can take another round of questions or follow up, if there are any. I don't see any hand. Any follow up? None. Going once, twice, thrice. It seems as if the explanation, was very clear and to the point. If there are no further questions, Mr. Gumede, maybe you would like to say some few words before we close. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Tlhabela. I'd like to thank the members of the media who joined us today. And we're hoping that the issue of the NRS 048-9, this version 3, has been better explained. And that we apologize for earlier where we perhaps did not quite understand the concern. We thought it was an obvious one, which, as Mr. Padiachi was indicating, is just a scenario-based system that simply says, in the event something like this happens, do you have the tools that are available to the systems operator? But quite frankly, it looked like the message out there was that we were saying this situation is imminent, which was not the message we were trying to communicate. But we are hoping that that has been better explained today. I'd like to thank you all for attending. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Gumede. And colleagues, this brings us to the end of the briefing session. And yes, I would also like to thank you all for your attendance and engagement. And I wish you all a very good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.